think true, authentic gratitude can be super healing and wonderful when we're feeling low and we have this pain that we're dealing with. But when it's kind of shoved in your face like this, it feels more like a shutdown rather than that healing feeling of authentic gratitude. Hey, you're listening to The Rare Life. I'm your host, Madeline Cheney, and today I have for you a solo episode. I want to talk about something very near and dear to my heart. It's been an issue I've struggled with, and my guess is I'm not the only one who has. So, of course, I had to record an episode about it. But first, I want to give a huge thank you to Brittany Stites and her family for generously sponsoring this episode. Brittany and I connected on social media when her son Logan was suspected of having the same very rare syndrome my son has. He tragically passed away, though, at 26 weeks gestation, and this sponsorship is dedicated to him in loving memory. She said, "The Rare Life was a cornerstone resource for our family as we were navigating a rare, complex medical diagnosis. While the medical community was full of data, this podcast provided us with real day-to-day insight and hope for the challenges and beauty that come along with genetic syndromes. We are grateful for the families that have shared their stories on this platform. This podcast has opened our eyes in so many ways, and we are honored to support this mission. Thank you, Stites family." If you would like to sponsor an episode, head to the website, therarelifepodcast.com, to fill out a contact form. And in the drop-down menu, just select the sponsor option. If you would like to make a smaller donation, you can do that on the platform Buy Me a Coffee. And links for both of those options are in the show notes. All support is so appreciated. Okay, so I want to talk about gaslighting, our experiences, our tough experiences with our disabled children, both from those around us and happening within us. And first of all, let's define gaslighting, because I feel like that's kind of a buzzword, but I wanted to get a better handle on what exactly it meant, and I'm sure there are some of you who are like, what does that mean again? So a definition I found online says the term gaslighting refers to a specific type of manipulation where the manipulator is trying to get someone else to question their own reality, memory, or perceptions, and they say it's always a serious problem. So in this context, I'll be talking mostly about things that cause us to question our perceptions of what's going on. And in every case I'm going to explain, it is with good intentions, because no one's sitting there trying to convince us that our reality is not our reality on purpose, or that we're perceiving things incorrectly. Most of us are surrounded by really loving people that accidentally gaslight us, or where we gaslight ourselves, and not on purpose, obviously. So in this episode, I'll mostly be talking about our perceptions being put into question, or ways that our pain or our realities are really minimized and not taken seriously by those around us who love us, and, doing that to ourselves. So I will first talk about how we are gaslit by others and examples of that. And then I want to dive into how we gaslight ourselves, because personally, I am no psychologist. I'm not pretending to be one, but I personally believe that's probably even more damaging than being gaslit by those that we love. So let's dive into people gaslighting us. So when I was thinking about this episode, I thought of how the key part of this is minimizing. It minimizes what we're going through, and it doesn't take those things seriously, our pain seriously. And, I was realizing when someone wants to minimize our pain, it's usually coming from a loved one, and it's because they love us. They want to shrink it. They want to literally minimize the hard thing that we're going through. And while it's, not helpful and makes us feel terrible, you can see where they're coming from on that. And I have found myself doing that, and especially with my kids, where, if Wendy hurts herself or she's really sad about something that happened at school or whatever, I find myself trying to cheer her up, but in a way that is minimizing what she's going through. Like, oh, no, you're fine. Oh, let's go do this thing real quick. Let's distract you by doing something fun. Or, oh, I'm sure it wasn't that bad. Your friends still love you. You're awesome. Let's go do this over here. And I'm not like being like an evil mom by saying that. But obviously it's a lot more empathetic and caring to say, oh, yeah, like that hurt, huh? And man, I can see the blood on your knee. Like, that must make you really sad. And although it usually elicits a bigger reaction from her, afterwards we feel so much more connected. And I feel like a better mom. And I think it's because of this. It's because although the instinctual reaction to seeing someone we love in pain is to try to shrink it and minimize it, what really connects us and helps that person feel seen is by sitting in that pain with them and acknowledging it and saying, yeah, I see that. That sucks. And not necessarily trying to just fix it right away. So when we're sharing, our pain or really tough situations about our children, with disabilities and medical complexities and things like that, a lot of the responses that do gaslight us come from toxic positivity, which they say is a form of unintentional gaslighting, which makes so much sense to me in this context because, these are our loved ones that are not trying to make us question our perception of our reality. Like, they're not trying to pull the wool over our eyes. Like, they really do love us. And so it's unintentional. And for those who are like, oh, what's toxic positivity again, which is another, big buzzword right now, that is defined as dismissing negative emotions and responding to distress with false reassurances rather than empathy. So, you're fine, get up, your knee's not that bad, let's distract you. It comes from feeling uncomfortable with negative emotions. It is often well-intentioned, but can cause alienation and a feeling of disconnection. Okay, I know all of us have experienced this in general, but especially regarding our children that are disabled, because there's this huge discomfort. You can see it in people. I remember that, especially the beginning with Kimball, and I would talk about not doing well. Like, they'd be like, oh, how's Kimball? And, the NICU and stuff. And I'd be like, things are really hard. And you could see them just kind of shut down and like try to hurry and like do a quick fix or a Band-Aid slap or let's hurry and end this conversation because this is really uncomfortable. So I think a lot of us learn to sugarcoat our answers or to kind of, straight up lie. Say, oh yeah, it's fine. Because of these kind of responses that we get when we're just being honest about our situation, which really sucks. Like it says, it fosters a feeling of alienation and disconnection. And I'm sure a lot of you have had relationships with your loved ones and friends impacted for the worse because of this kind of response that's really natural in our society. So I wanted to go through and share some of the biggest type of responses that fall under this category of toxic positivity, which is a form of unintentional gaslighting that I think are probably most common that we receive when sharing our hard. And some of these are, well, all of them were from August 2021's question of the month, which was what not to say to parents of disabled children. So here we go. Don't minimize our pain is basically what we want. All right. So the first one that just gets me is at least ... or it could be worse because ... or, oh, aren't you grateful? XYZ. And I was thinking like, man, why does this irk me so much? I did hear this quote that said, no good sentence begins with the words at least. And maybe that's a little extreme, but I'm like, yeah, like this is something that bothers other people too. But like, I think one reason is that it makes me feel like the person receiving my pain that I've been sharing is saying, you don't really have the right to struggle with this. I mean, like, look at all the things that you have, or look at all the good things about your life. Like, do you really have the right to feel bad right now? No, like you're pretty wimpy. And that is something I am so sensitive to, is feeling like someone's calling me weak or like I'm overreacting or being too sensitive. So that is, especially for me personally, is like, I hate that. But like, everyone on this earth has a right to struggle, regardless of how, blessed we are, or regardless of all the things we do have. And I do think, gratitude's an interesting one, because I think true, authentic gratitude can be super healing and wonderful when we're feeling low and we have this pain that we're dealing with. But when it's kind of shoved in your face like this, it feels more like a shutdown, or like you don't have license to struggle with this, rather than that healing feeling of authentic gratitude. And I think it feels a little bit forced too. Like, don't force me to feel grateful. Like, I'm not feeling grateful right now. I just want to feel mad or sad, or, or whatever. And I think that that gratitude that we come to on our own, that isn't shoved in our face by other people, can be so tender and so meaningful, maybe after you feel safely listened to and validated for your pain that you're going through. You really can, I think often you'll come to that conclusion anyway, but it'll be meaningful and authentic and tender, and, like hugging my children and being like, oh, I'm so glad you made it here safely. Or, being embraced by Justin, my partner, and being like, oh my goodness, I'm so grateful for his support. But, that usually comes after being able to safely vent and share the hard that's going on, and not having all my blessings and the great stuff being shoved in my face as a response to my pain. So yeah, that's a big one for me, is the at least ... or it could be worse because ... and aren't you grateful ... Let us come to that conclusion. Please do not shove it in our faces. And then another one I heard from a lot of you about is the kind of cheap write-off of, I'm sure they'll be fine, or I'm sure you'll be fine. In one way or another, that could be also, oh, I have, a cousin's friend's neighbor who also had a disability, and, they're a professional ice skater now, and your kid will be fine. Things like that just kind of come out of left field, and you're like, you don't know it's going to be fine. I don't know it's going to be fine. The doctors don't know it's going to be fine. Like, no one knows it's going to be fine. But what it really feels like is a kind of cheap write-off, or an abrupt ending of like, I can't handle hearing this right now. So let me slap this Band-Aid of, I'm sure it'll be fine, and I'm going to move on and go do my grocery shopping, or like whatever, I feel like it's a big shutdown. And, we take note of that. We take note of who is willing to listen and who seems to like be open to that, and who slaps the, I gotta go, let's end this real quick. I don't want to hear this. This is painful for me to hear. And so, yeah, I feel like that's a big one too. Okay, so the last one, and I know this one, it really is said a lot, and I know a lot of parents have a problem with hearing this one, but it is, God gives special kids to special parents, or I don't know how you do it, or I couldn't do what you do. And, this sends the message that we're somehow more equipped to handle what pain we're going through, and we're not. And so I think that feels really invalidating, because it's like, well, then obviously you don't know the depth of my pain if you think that I'm more equipped to go through this than you are, and you're not willing to entertain what it might feel like for me. And that is very minimizing, and it's isolating because you think we're some kind of rare breed. But, I think, again, all three of these responses, I'll say usually, are coming from a place of love, of someone who doesn't like seeing us in pain, of someone who might want to believe that we're more equipped than they are to be able to handle this. But the fact is that these are all minimizing of our pain in a way that's really painful for us. And it's gaslighting our situation and the perceptions that we have of our situation, and maybe questioning like, oh, are you overreacting? Oh, it's not that bad. Calm down. And no one wants to be told that when they're in pain. So, I think what a lot of us really want is validation and empathy. So sit with us in it, be willing to be pained with us. I think that is so meaningful. So response is more like, that must be really hard for you. And man, I'm sorry you're going through this. Or, man, I'm sorry your child's going through this. Or, this really sucks right now. I'm going to support you by blank and specific offer. I'll say, not just when you need me. I'll throw that in there too. And I feel like a great illustration of this is in the Disney movie Inside Out. So there's this scene you may remember with Bing Bong, Riley's imaginary friend that she's basically forgotten, and he's really sad about it. And he sits down and he just cries and cries and, refuses to move on to show Joy and Sadness where to go when they need to catch the train or whatever it is they're trying to do. And Joy sees that and she tries to make silly faces and she jumps around and does a dance and she's trying to like cheer him out of it, which I think a lot of us, like the whole like child scraping the knee thing, we get tempted to do that with our loved ones. But then Sadness sits down next to him and validates him. I mean, that scene, it always gets me. I'm just, oh my gosh, it is so tender. Where Sadness says, wow, like that must be really hard for you. That's sad. Joy is like, no, stop doing that. Like you're making it worse. But Bing Bong opens up about it and he's like, yeah. And then he talks about it for a while about how sad he is. And they just sit there feeling sad together. But then he's like, okay, let me show you where to go. And Joy just looks at Sadness like, what just happened? How did you do that? And I think that right there is a really great illustration of like, be sad with us. That feels so connecting and it feels really validating. And you're showing us that like, yes, your perceptions of what's going on right now make sense. Like I would probably feel a similar way too. And, there's a reason that that's what therapists do. They sit there and validate you the whole time because it is really, really helpful. And especially coming from a loved one or a friend to hear, that validation is so, so wonderful. And as it turns out, I feel like the same type of approach is helpful when we do it to ourselves. And so I'm going to kind of shift gears over to when we are gaslighting ourselves. And, I think what we do need is to sit with ourselves and to be sad and to say, yeah, I can see why you didn't want to get out of bed this morning, Mads. Like, yeah, this is hard. And it makes sense that you're feeling this way. And yeah, let's just order pizza for dinner because, yeah, this is really hard. And, we're the ones closest to ourselves. And I think when the dialogue is less compassionate, it can be really, really harmful. And I've experienced this firsthand. So I'll share all the juicy details on that. But, I think a lot of times the self-talk and attitudes, especially for me, are, things like, why aren't you over this yet? In variations. Why aren't you over this yet? Why are you still so sad about this? And it's not that big of a deal. So-and-so has it worse. Or you've had it worse. And I feel like that is a really big one. Just gaslighting ourselves because someone else has it worse. And I feel like this especially relates, if you're involved on social media and, you read about other parents, talking about their child and what they're going through together. And I think it's really easy for us to see that and be like, well, that person has it way worse than I do. Or even, listening to podcast episodes. Well, she really has it tough. Why am I struggling so much with what my kid's going through or what we're going through? This isn't anything compared to that. And I think that can also silence us so that we don't feel as comfortable sharing. Like if I'm sharing, wow, I hate putting eye patches on my son because he's really sad when he has them on and he talks about how he can't see and he wants it off and all that. But, sharing that kind of thing sometimes feels a little squirmy or guilty because I'm like, this is nothing compared to this other person. And this is nothing compared to what we were going through together a couple years ago. And I think comparison really feeds that gaslighting ourselves, because that voice pops into our head and like, well, but is it really that bad because this person has it worse? But you know what? It doesn't matter if someone else has it worse. That doesn't make it any less painful for you and what you're going through. And that's easier said than done. And I'm not exactly sure what the solution is with that, other than just realizing that that's an issue that all of us struggle with, that someone has it worse than every person ever. Like there's always going to be someone who has it worse, even than the person that you think has it the very worst. And that it shouldn't silence us. Like we can still talk about pain and we can still talk about what's hard for us and we can still feel that. And we still have license to feel that, even if someone else has it worse. And, I'm guessing that a lot of you have felt this way too in, different painful situations with your child where like you feel like your reaction is bigger than what the situation warrants. And I think that's what it kind of comes down to is like, okay, what would make sense in this situation? Well, you're freaking out way too much when we're going to appointments. Like saying this internally to yourself, you're freaking out way too much. Like this doesn't make any sense. And it could be worse. Your child could be hospitalized again. Remember when that happened, a few weeks ago, and at least you're just going to a follow-up appointment. Why are you unglued right now? I think a lot of times when that happens, when our reaction feels bigger than what we decide, it should be, a lot of times there's a judgment made about ourselves rather than just an observation of like, wow, I feel unglued right now at this appointment. Makes sense because I, XYZ. But a lot of times instead of that, we go to, man, I'm unglued right now. I'm so fragile. What is wrong with me? I can't handle anything. And I'm weak. And I think those judgment calls we make on ourselves just make everything so much worse. Like we're just kicking ourselves while we're down. And I think an example of this that I've noticed in my life, and neither of these are directly related to like Kimball and his medical stuff, but I feel like they illustrate this point really well. So I'll share a couple examples of this whole like deciding what our reaction should be in relation to what's happening. And then, if it's in line with that and what happens internally for us. So when my dad passed away from brain cancer 5 years ago, it was this terrible, horrible thing. My sister was 11. My brother was 14. I mean, there were still kids at home. My mom was young and in love with him. And it was awful. It was so awful. And so, I struggled with it. I was really, really upset. I was sad. But because my dad just died from cancer and it was super abrupt and it was really sad and everyone was struggling, it made sense to me. I was like, yes, of course I'm struggling. My dad just died from cancer, from brain cancer. Like that warrants a big reaction. And I'll tell you right now, like I'm really upset that my dad passed away and I miss him like more every day. But I've never shamed myself about my reaction to that. I can struggle as much as I want and miss him as much as I want, but I've never shamed myself about it or tried to minimize it or say, why aren't you over this yet? Or, it's not that big of a deal. Calm down, move on. And processing that has been pretty straightforward. Not easy, but straightforward. It hasn't been messed up by me being mean to myself. And so that in contrast to recurrent miscarriage that I've endured. And I know a lot of you know about this either through Instagram or past episodes, but I have a lot of miscarriages and it runs in my family. And to be honest, I'm still definitely grappling with this. So it's a little difficult to talk about, but it illustrates this point. And this is actually when I realized the danger or the pain or how toxic it can be to gaslight ourselves, because I've been doing that about my miscarriages. So a little bit of context, a little background. So I have had 4 miscarriages, and I have my 2 living children, and 3 of those miscarriages happened within 1 year, the year of 2020, actually. So in October of 2020, I had my 3rd miscarriage out of that set of 3, and it unglued me. So it's been a year and a half about, and I still really struggle with it. With that one in particular, and then all of them collectively, and, our future, and, what that might mean, because I'm a carrier for my son's condition, and that's probably what's causing the miscarriages, that these babies probably have the deletion. And if I do keep a pregnancy, well, then, they have a pretty good chance of being stillborn, and they have a pretty good chance of dying within the first month after they're born. Okay, so these are like some pretty heavy statistics, and for reasons I'm not going to go into right now because they're not super relevant, I've decided not to do IVF and just to plow ahead. And, a lot of people might be like, well, why are you even having more kids, Mads? Like, anyone would be like, yeah, I'm done. Well, I also feel this longing for, another child. And so, I feel like part of my heart isn't here. Like, I need that child. And so it's really a difficult situation if you think about it like that. And it has been really difficult. But after that 4th miscarriage, I tried to power through. I was like, okay, let's just move on. It's just a miscarriage, just a miscarriage. I was 11 weeks. I wasn't in my 2nd trimester or anything. And the day I started bleeding, I had an interview scheduled, but it was with my therapist. My therapist that I had worked through all my trauma with Kimball, and then we'd kind of graduated, and I was going to interview her about the therapy. And I did interview her that night. I told her in the episode, I'm miscarrying right now. And just all to illustrate, I was powering through. I was trying to power through and be like, okay, it's not a big deal, move on. And I could feel myself, dragging through that. It was a really big deal to my spirit, I guess, to my heart. I felt so undone by this miscarriage. And I remember after I was done bleeding and I changed the sheets on our bed, they're white sheets, and I was able to bleach out all the blood that was on our sheets from when I was miscarrying. And I put them on the bed, and I was like, there, now it's all clean. I'm so proud of myself for getting those huge stains out of these. And then I just lost it, and I just started bawling like a baby because I was like, oh my gosh, my baby's gone. I erased this baby. I have nothing else left of this baby that I felt so connected to. And my husband was standing there, and this huge reaction, he was kind of scared. He was like, Mads, are you okay? And he held me while I just cried on him. And he was like, maybe you need to go see Rosie again, your therapist, because this seems, it's been a whole week. Why are you still so unglued about this? And I'm not trying to bash Justin. He was just expressing concern. But that right there was a huge turning point where I was like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? I need to get over this. And I think that huge reaction was scary to me because, again, I was like, it was just a miscarriage. Why is this, I feel like I'll never be happy again. I feel this huge amount of grief and pain right now. And this is way bigger than I think should be appropriate for a miscarriage. And that's kind of how it went on for months. I was just faking it and trying to put on a happy face, oh, it's okay. Because I was so afraid of struggling again like I was when Kimball was in that first year. I felt like I was kind of slipping back into that. And I was like, no. I worked so hard to get back to this place where I'm like, I have a podcast and I'm, doing great. And I'm happy and I'm over it. But all of a sudden I was thrown back into this intense grief, and I just tried to power through it. Well, I finally did meet with Rosie because I felt dead inside, and I felt, a lot of depressive symptoms. Like sometimes I just didn't want to get up off the couch, and I didn't have the energy to take the kids to the park and things like that. And I just kept telling myself, like, get over it. Why aren't you over this yet? And it's not that big of a deal. Like, your child wasn't stillborn. They could have died as a baby. Like, look at these other people that are struggling. That makes sense for them. Why are you so wimpy? Why are you so weak? And again, I was kicking myself while I was curled up on the ground. And a big reveal, it didn't help. In fact, it screwed up my processing and my healing. And working with my therapist, we worked for 9 months on this. When we ended, I still was not over it. And we had concluded that it was this self-talk that I had, that I was just so disgusted with myself for not getting over it and minimizing what I was going through. And when we realized that that's really what was at the very core of this, was that I was so disgusted with how much I'd struggled with this, and I still was struggling with it. It broke my heart. I was like, what have I done to myself? What have I been doing to myself? Like, I should be my own best ally. But I've been so mean to myself about this because I decided that my reaction and my deep, deep pain was weak and that it didn't make sense for what was going on. But the fact is, it comes from our love. When we're struggling with these things, especially related to the unborn children, like it was for me, or for your disabled children, or whoever, so many times that is grounded in love, the deep love that we have for them. And it's not weak, it's love. And it's not weak, it's just human. And so, that was a huge, huge wake-up call to me to stop gaslighting myself. Like, yes, Maz, this is a big deal. It is scary. It makes sense you don't want to get out of bed today. And I think validating ourselves the same way that we would want loved ones to validate us, to shift over from, why aren't you over this yet? And it's not that big of a deal. So-and-so has it worse, to, this is really hard for you. And I'm so sorry you're going through this. And this really sucks right now. I'm going to support you by blank. Maybe that's ordering takeout or watching a movie, snuggle up with your kids, or, whatever it is that you feel like you need support from yourself with, that permission that you need. And, of course, we want this validation from our loved ones, but really the person that we have the most control over, and really the only control over, is ourselves. So I think choosing to have this kind of self-talk is really important and can be very, very changing in the way that we're struggling with different things. And, I am still working on this. It's been very hard for me to unlearn this gaslighting of my struggle. And so I invite you to join me in working on this. If this is something that you feel like you could work on too, please join me. Allow yourself to feel the pain and struggle, as deeply and as intensely as it comes. It's really hard because obviously we don't want to feel pain. We want to be on fire. We want to be thriving. We want to be super resilient. But I've learned through study on mindfulness that true resilience is letting the hard things come and really feeling them, and then letting them kind of pass through us because we didn't resist it. We let them come. And, let's practice true resilience by allowing ourselves to feel that pain of whatever's happening. And as you struggle with it, just know that you're not the only one. There is a link in the show notes for our sponsor, BetterHelp, who provides online therapy through licensed therapists. And if you use the link to sign up, then a portion of that goes towards supporting the podcast. So check that out if you want, if you feel like you need more support in working through whatever you're working through right now. And you can also find a link in the show notes to the episode I mentioned where I interviewed my therapist when I should not have. If you're curious on that one, I thought it ended up being great, but I should have rescheduled that. That is episode 25, and it's about trauma therapy, ironically. And then if you don't yet, be sure to follow me on Instagram at the_rare_life, and I'll put a link for that in the show notes. Join me next week for episode 90, all about chronic sleep deprivation as a result of our children with disabilities. I know so many of you will relate with this one. Don't miss it. See you then.